PTSD is a well-known but poorly understood psychological condition. People often associate it with military veterans coming back from war, but PTSD can be associated with a wide range of traumatic experiences. These can include things like war or combat, but also physical assaults, life-threatening accidents, exposure to natural disasters like earthquakes or hurricanes, witnessing violent crime, or experiencing medical emergencies like suffering a heart attack or complications in childbirth. And in PTSD, the trauma doesn't have to be just about direct exposure to the traumatic event, but people can also develop PTSD from witnessing a traumatic event happening to someone close to them, such as seeing a family member or friend being attacked or killed in a violent event. PTSD can develop from learning about traumatic events happening to a close friend or relative, even if the person didn't directly witness it happening. Just hearing about the traumatic event happening to a loved one can cause PTSD. And for certain professions like first responders or medical professionals or journalists who are exposed to repeated or extreme exposure to traumatic events, they can also develop PTSD from their work experiences. So there are lots of different types of stressors that can cause PTSD in a person. And in today's video, we're going to be talking about the various different symptoms and symptom clusters that comprise PTSD. This includes re-experiencing symptoms like flashbacks or nightmares, avoidance symptoms aimed at avoiding triggers or reminders of the traumatic event, negative thoughts and negative mood symptoms related to how the traumatic event changes a person's emotional functioning and the way they view themselves and the world around them, and hyperarousal symptoms associated with a person being in a constant state of high alert after exposure to a traumatic event. And this is a compilation video putting together 4 previous videos I've done about the various symptoms of PTSD. And so I hope you'll find it helpful to have all of the symptoms explained and described in this one video. So with that background, let's start talking about re-experiencing symptoms in PTSD. And re-experiencing goes beyond simply remembering the traumatic event. It encompasses the intense and involuntary ways that the event can resurface in a person's mind and body, creating a sense of reliving the event or being constantly on edge in anticipation of future danger. By understanding re-experiencing symptoms, we can gain a deeper appreciation for the profound impact that trauma can have on a person's experience of the world. We can begin to understand why something like a loud noise can trigger a soldier to be back on the battlefield, or why a car backfiring can evoke feelings of terror in someone who survived a car accident. So what are re-experiencing symptoms? What are examples of re-experiencing symptoms? And what we're going to start with is the one that people often think about when they think about PTSD, and that's flashbacks. Now, while flashbacks are often described as vivid memories of the traumatic event, they're much more than a simple replay. Flashbacks are intense sensory experiences that transport the individual back to the trauma in a way that feels incredibly real. People experiencing flashbacks may report feeling, seeing, hearing, smelling, or even tasting things exactly like they did during the event. This can be a complete sensory overload, causing a feeling of being pulled back into the moment of the trauma itself. Imagine a survivor of a house fire. Now, during a flashback, they might not just see the flames, but also feel the intense heat on their skin. They may smell the smoke in the air, and they may hear the crackling and the burning of the fire. This overwhelming sensory experience can be incredibly disorienting and frightening. The person may struggle to distinguish between the present moment that they're in and the traumatic event in the past, leading to feeling like they're out of control. Now, the duration of flashbacks, they can vary greatly. Some flashbacks may only last a few seconds, like a fleeting image or a fleeting sound. Others can be much more prolonged, lasting for several minutes or even hours in some extreme cases. The intensity and duration of flashbacks can be unpredictable, making them even more disruptive in a person's life. Now, there are two main types of flashbacks in PTSD, each with its own distinct characteristics. Now, dissociative flashbacks, these are often considered the most intense and disturbing types of flashbacks. People experiencing dissociative flashbacks may feel completely detached from their surroundings, or even feel detached from themselves. And this detachment can be a coping mechanism, as a way for the mind to try and protect itself from the overwhelming emotions associated with the trauma. So imagine a soldier who witnessed a bomb explosion. During a dissociative flashback, they might feel like they're watching the scene unfold from a distance, outside of their own body. They may feel numb, disconnected, and experience a sense of complete unreality. This dissociation can be a very frightening experience, leaving the person feeling lost and confused as to what exactly is going on. The second type of flashbacks are emotional flashbacks, and these flashbacks are primarily caused by the overwhelming emotions associated with the trauma, rather than the specific sensory details of the event. So someone experiencing an emotional flashback might feel intense fear, anger, sadness, or shame, even if they don't have a full visual or auditory memory of the event. These emotions can be so intense that they feel overwhelming and they debilitate a person. So, for example, a survivor of a sexual assault might experience a wave of fear and shame during an emotional flashback, even if they don't recall specific details of the assault itself. These emotional flashbacks can be very triggering and disruptive to daily life. Now, the second type of re-experiencing symptom is nightmares. Nightmares and PTSD share a kinship with flashbacks, but they manifest in a person's sleep. These dreams are often vivid and disturbing. They can replay elements of the traumatic event in a way that feels disorienting and extremely emotionally charged. Now, unlike flashbacks, which occur when a person is awake, nightmares trap people within the confines of sleep, making them feel powerless to escape the disturbing imagery or scenes. The context of these nightmares can vary depending on the specific trauma. So someone who's witnessed a car accident might dream of being trapped in a vehicle, careening out of control. A survivor of abuse might dream of being chased or threatened. However, nightmares aren't always, and they don't have to be, literal representations of the trauma itself. Sometimes nightmares can use symbolism to express the emotional residue of the trauma. So, for example, someone who's experienced betrayal might dream of being lost in a dark forest, representing feeling isolated and fear associated with the trauma. The intensity and the emotional impact of these nightmares can be significant. People with PTSD may wake up from the nightmares feeling terrified, sweaty, and with a racing heart. The lingering emotions from the nightmare can disrupt the sleep cycle, making it difficult to fall back asleep or return to a restful sleep. And this sleep disruption can lead to daytime fatigue, difficulty concentrating, and irritability, which creates this vicious cycle that can worsen other PTSD symptoms. Now, perhaps the most debilitating aspect of PTSD nightmares is the fear of having them again. This anticipation, this anticipatory anxiety can lead to sleep avoidance, where individuals with PTSD deliberately stay awake to avoid the possibility of nightmares. And while this might seem like a logical solution in the short term, it ultimately backfires. Sleep deprivation worsens PTSD symptoms, making a person more vulnerable to experiencing flashbacks, intrusive thoughts, and heightened emotional reactivity throughout the day. The lack of sleep also weakens a person's natural resilience, making it harder to cope with stress and daily challenges. So as a result, the combination of sleep deprivation and the emotional toll of nightmares creates significant burden for a person with PTSD. The third type of PTSD re-experiencing symptoms is intrusive thoughts. And you can think of intrusive thoughts like unwelcome visitors that intrude upon your mind if you're experiencing PTSD. Unlike memories which we can consciously choose to recall, intrusive thoughts are involuntary and they often pop up unexpectedly throughout the day. They can be images, thoughts, or even feelings related to the traumatic event, and they can cause significant emotional distress. Now, the constant intrusive thoughts in PTSD can vary depending on the nature of the trauma. So common themes include things like reliving aspects of the event. Intrusive thoughts may replay specific moments or point moments from the trauma, forcing the person to relive that experience in their mind. A veteran might have an intrusive thought about the sights, sounds, and smells of combat. A survivor of a violent assault may have intrusive thoughts about the attacker's face or the feeling of being overpowered. Intrusive thoughts can also involve imagining future dangers. People with PTSD may experience intrusive thoughts focused on potential future threats. These thoughts can be a way of trying to feel prepared or in control, but they can also lead to constant anxiety and hypervigilance to threat. For example, someone who was mugged might have intrusive thoughts about being attacked again every time they walk alone at night. And intrusive thoughts can also include fixating on negative emotions associated with the trauma, things like guilt, shame, or fear. Someone who's lost a loved one in a tragedy might have intrusive thoughts about things that they could have done differently, even if they were powerless to change or prevent the outcome. You see, the intrusive nature of these thoughts is what makes them so disruptive. Unlike regular memories that we can choose to focus on or ignore, intrusive thoughts are persistent and demand attention. They can be difficult to push away, causing significant distress and interference with daily life. Things like concentration, work performance, and social interactions can all suffer when intrusive thoughts become this constant presence, popping up again and again and again. And the final group of PTSD re-experiencing symptoms involve psychological distress and physiological responses to reminders or triggers of the traumatic event. People with PTSD may experience a surge of emotion, primarily negative emotion, when they encounter reminders of the trauma. These reminders can be sensory cues that directly link back to the event, triggering a powerful emotional response. So imagine again a soldier who witnessed a bomb explosion. The sight of smoke rising from a chimney or the sound of a car backfiring can act as a sensory trigger, instantly transporting that person back to the battlefield and evoking feelings of fear and anxiety. The reminders can be more subtle as well. A smell, a taste, or even a specific location can trigger a powerful emotional response. For example, someone who was assaulted in a hospital might feel an overwhelming fear and panic upon entering a hospital setting again. These seemingly innocuous triggers become linked to the trauma in the person's brain, and they create this powerful emotional association. And there are a lot of emotional reactions that can be triggered. The most common reaction to trauma reminders is fear, is anxiety. The reminders can trigger a sense of impending danger, even though the situation itself is not threatening. Reminders can also evoke anger, especially if the trauma involved feelings of betrayal or injustice. This intense anger can be directed at oneself, the perpetrator of the trauma, the world at large, or even the seemingly innocuous reminder itself. Experiencing reminders of the trauma can lead to intense feelings of sadness, grief, and loss. These emotions are a natural response to the overwhelming experience of the trauma itself and can be made worse by the feelings of isolation or a sense that the world has moved on while the person is still struggling with the trauma. In some cases, Trauma reminders can trigger feelings of disgust, particularly if the trauma involved violence or physical injury. These feelings of disgust can be so intense that they make it difficult to even think about the trauma, let alone process it in a healthy way. Now, in addition to these emotional responses, people with PTSD may also experience physical reactions when encountering trauma reminders. These reactions are caused by the body's fight or flight response being activated. The body is essentially perceiving the reminder as a threat, even though it may not be, and then prepares itself for danger. Some of the most common physical reactions to trauma reminders include increased heart rate and sweating. These are classic fight or flight responses where the body prepares for physical exertion or escape. The person might feel their heart pounding in their chest, their palms becoming sweaty, and they may feel this surge of adrenaline. They may experience difficulty breathing, which can lead to feelings of dizziness or lightheadedness. The person might feel tightness in their chest caused by rapid, shallow breaths, or they may even be hyperventilating. The body may tense up in preparation for potential danger, leading to aches and pains throughout the body, particularly in the shoulders, the neck, and the jaw. The person's digestive system can shut down temporarily due to the body's focus on responding to threat, and this can lead to feelings of nausea, stomach cramps, or even diarrhea. Now, there are two main forms of avoidance, and the first is called cognitive avoidance. Now, to understand cognitive avoidance, I want you to imagine a mental game of whack-a-mole. But instead of those moles, those pesky rodents that you're trying to hit with the mallet, the targets are intrusive thoughts and memories related to the traumatic event. People with PTSD may engage in a constant battle to keep these thoughts and memories at bay, like they're playing whack-a-mole. And they can do this in a few different ways. The first way is something called intrusion prevention, which is a kind of a way of hitting the pause button on intrusive thoughts. This strategy involves a constant state of mental vigilance. People with PTSD might develop a hair trigger sensitivity to anything that could potentially spark a memory or thought related to the trauma. And so the person may engage in constant activity. The fear of intrusive thoughts can lead to a need to stay constantly busy, keeping your mind occupied. People may fill their time with work or hobbies or social engagements to avoid any quiet moments where their minds might wander and memories of the traumatic event might resurface. People with PTSD will often find themselves using distraction techniques like listening to music, podcasts, or audiobooks, keeping the TV on in the background as a way of background noise, or engaging in mentally stimulating activities like crossword puzzles or games. All of these things are designed to keep the mind busy so that I don't think about the traumatic event. A second way that people can engage in cognitive avoidance is through mental blocking or intentionally trying to push away painful memories. This approach involves actively trying to suppress or push away thoughts or memories associated with the trauma. It's like trying to force a beach ball underwater. It might seem effective for a few moments, but eventually the memories resurface with a renewed force. Mental blocking can manifest as forced positive thinking. Some people might try to replace negative thoughts or memories about the trauma with positive affirmations or focusing on happy memories. Now, while positive thinking can be a valuable coping mechanism in general, it's ineffective when it's used to suppress the emotional reality of the trauma. A third form of cognitive avoidance involves topic avoidance, or changing the subject before it gets too close to reminders of the trauma. Conversations are an essential part of human connection, but for people with PTSD, certain topics can become emotional minefields. This can lead to a strategy of topic avoidance, manifesting as shifting gears when a conversation is veering towards a topic that could even vaguely be related to the trauma, someone with PTSD may abruptly change the subject. This can be a way of preventing triggering memories or emotions. The person could also engage in social withdrawal. The fear of triggering conversations can lead to a person withdrawing socially. They might avoid gatherings or social situations altogether, and they might become withdrawn or uncommunicative in group settings. Then there's nonverbal cues. People with PTSD might also use nonverbal cues to avoid triggering topics. They might become visibly uncomfortable, fidgety, or withdrawn when a conversation takes a turn they'd rather avoid, essentially shutting down and shutting out the conversation. So those are all forms of cognitive avoidance, avoiding thoughts related to the trauma and the memories. But the avoidance symptoms in PTSD can extend far beyond thoughts and memories. They can create a complex web of restrictions around a person's daily life, impacting everything from where a person goes to how they interact with others. This is behavioral avoidance, and it can manifest itself in a number of different ways. There's activity avoidance, and this pattern of activity avoidance is common in PTSD. Activities that were previously enjoyable but have somehow become linked to the trauma are actively avoided. Someone who was in a car accident might give up driving altogether, even for short trips. This not only restricts their independence and sense of freedom, but it also contributes to a feeling of loss and decreased overall well-being. A person can experience avoidance of places, locations associated with the trauma, become off-limit zones. A person who was assaulted in a specific park might avoid that entire area altogether, even if it means things like missing out on social gatherings or scenic walks that they once enjoyed doing in that park. This place avoidance can extend beyond just the specific location of the event. So, for instance, someone who was mugged on a specific street corner, they might start avoiding the entire neighborhood altogether. They may start avoiding going out at night or going for walks altogether, essentially limiting access to these activities, limiting access to essential services or familiar amenities or even social connections. The fear of encountering reminders of the trauma can significantly restrict a person's daily routines and shrink their perceived safe havens in the world. There can be avoidance of certain people. The fear of reminders can lead to a decrease in contact with people associated with the trauma, even those who were sources of support during the ordeal. This avoidance can be indirect and it can be unintentional. So, someone who experienced a traumatic event at work might find it difficult to return to that workplace, leading to strained relationships with colleagues or even a person having to change their job. Similarly, someone who was involved in a motor vehicle accident with their best friend may find that they avoid seeing or talking with that friend after the accident because that friend has become associated with memories and thoughts about the accident. While the avoidance might be a way of protecting themselves from emotional triggers, it can also lead to isolation and a sense of disconnection from loved ones. And then there's situational avoidance. Situations that share even superficial similarities to the trauma can become triggers for avoidance. Someone who was traumatized during a crowded concert might avoid all large gatherings or loud events altogether. This situational avoidance can significantly limit a person's ability to participate in important life events, social activities, or even cultural experiences. So, for example, a person who was attacked by a dog might avoid all dog parks or even walking in the area where they might encounter dogs. And this restricts their ability on where they're going or to even enjoy outdoor activities. Now, it's important to remember that these strategies, while seemingly logical attempts to cope with overwhelming emotions, can be counterproductive in the long run. Avoidance behaviors can prevent people from processing the trauma, and ultimately hinder the healing process. The avoidance can also lead to a person's world becoming progressively smaller and smaller and smaller. So it's this avoidance that becomes a significant target of the treatment in PTSD. The traumatic event can change a person's sense of self-worth. It can lead to distorted beliefs about the world and leave a person feeling emotionally numb or empty. So the first of these symptoms is that a person can develop negative thoughts about themselves, other people, or the world more generally. Imagine a soldier returning home from war in which he witnessed horrific events and was constantly in danger. After coming home, the soldier may struggle with beliefs that the world is a fundamentally unsafe place and has this pervasive sense of danger that affects his entire outlook about everything around him, making it really difficult to feel secure and to relax at any time. He may have difficulty trusting other people, perceiving that other people are not reliable or supportive in a crisis. Common beliefs about others include the belief that other people aren't trustworthy, that other people are dangerous, and that you should be extremely cautious about other people. This mistrust of others can make it challenging to form new relationships or maintain existing relationships, and this can lead to isolation, withdrawal, and loneliness. And as a result, people withdraw from social activities, afraid of putting themselves in situations that they might perceive to be unsafe, and their social network becomes much smaller and smaller and smaller. Additionally, it's very common that people develop negative beliefs and thoughts about themselves after a traumatic event. The person might constantly replay the traumatic event in their mind, questioning their every decision and every action. And this can lead to self-blame, in which the person believes that there was something they could have done to have prevented the traumatic event, or more that they could have done to protect themselves or other people. And these negative thoughts about a person's capabilities then serve to erode their self-esteem and their perception about their ability to keep themselves safe. And related to this, another type of symptom is distorted thoughts about the causes and consequences of the traumatic event. This often appears as a persistent and typically irrational sense of blame, either directed toward oneself or outwards towards other people. You typically see this in victims of sexual assault who constantly replay the event in their mind, thinking about every detail and trying to come up with something they could have done differently to have prevented the sexual assault. The person might blame themselves for being in a certain place at a certain time. They might blame themselves for trusting the wrong person or for not fighting back harder. This self-blame, in turn, chips away at a person's sense of self-worth, and this further contributes to more negative beliefs about themselves. Now, these distorted beliefs can also take the form of blaming other people involved in the situation. For example, the victim of sexual assault might blame the police for not responding quickly enough, or might blame bystanders for not intervening. Now, it's important to recognize that these feelings are understandable in the immediate aftermath of a traumatic event, but holding on to this blame can create a sense of anger and resentment, which makes it a lot more difficult to move forward and to put the traumatic event behind. This tendency to blame oneself or other people after a traumatic event can be incredibly isolating. It can cause a person to be reluctant to confide in other people, fearing judgment or blame, and this can make it difficult for a person to seek support or help, worsening the emotional toll that the PTSD is having on them. It's important to recognize that it's natural that we want to find meaning and understanding when these traumatic events occur, but this type of blaming, self-blaming or other blaming, tends to be misplaced. So, for example, for the sexual assault victim, the responsibility of the assault does not fall on the victim or the police or the bystanders, but the responsibility and the blame for the assault falls solely on the perpetrator. And this can sometimes get lost when a person becomes so focused on blaming themselves or other people. Now, one of the more surprising and distressing symptoms of PTSD is difficulty remembering important aspects of the trauma itself. At first, this seems really counterintuitive because you would think that a, a significant traumatic event like an assault or serious accident would be seared into a person's memory. However, the brain's natural response to overwhelming stress can sometimes interfere with the formation of clear memories at the time that the event is happening. When an event is perceived as highly stressful or dangerous, the body releases a surge of hormones like adrenaline and cortisol, which are hormones that play a crucial role in the fight or flight response. But the thing is, these hormones and the fight or flight response can disrupt the process of memory formation. So, for example, a person who's involved in a serious car accident, they might find that they struggle to remember specific details of the accident. They might remember flashes of images or certain sounds, but the overall memory of the accident can feel fragmented and incomplete. A client once explained to me that it's kind of like you have a jigsaw puzzle and you've shaken up the jigsaw puzzle, and so all you get is little bits and pieces of the puzzle without the totality of the image. And this lack of clarity around remembering important aspects of the traumatic event can be incredibly frustrating and disorienting for a person. It can often raise doubts about the person's sanity, wondering why they can't remember such seemingly important details about such a significant event. And this fragmented memory can have a major impact on a person's healing after the trauma. Without a clear understanding of what actually happened, it's difficult to process the emotions associated with the trauma. So the person just experiences little snippets and images of what happened without having a cohesive picture or a narrative for the event, which furthers the person's anxiety as they often fill in the gaps with their own worst-case scenarios. Another common symptom of PTSD is the presence of persistent negative emotional states like fear, horror, anger, guilt, and shame. These emotions can be intense and unrelenting. So, for example, someone who is involved in a car accident may initially experience understandable anxiety and fear following the accident, but in PTSD, these strong emotional states persist, leading to a person becoming highly anxious or fearful of driving again, or the person may experience feelings of horror as they replay the accident in their mind over and over again, contributing to further anxiety or even panic attacks. The negative emotions can also manifest as anger. The person may be extremely angry at the situation, angry at the person who caused the accident, or persistently angry at themselves for not have been able to prevent the accident. And this anger is often directed outwards, which can lead to problems in relationships, or it can be directed inwards, which fuels that self-blame and negativity. So you can see a lot of the symptoms interact with one another to make other symptoms worse. And related to this, guilt and shame are common negative emotions that persist in PTSD. The person might feel guilt due to self-blame about the accident, or feelings of shame for how the accident has continued to affect the person and that they haven't been able to get over it. These feelings can be incredibly isolating and contribute to a harsh inner critic that just makes a person feel so much worse about themselves. Now, one of the most interfering symptoms of PTSD is a loss of interest in activities that a person used to enjoy before the traumatic event. For example, a person may have been a passionate musician who loved playing guitar, seeing music as an escape, a creative outlet, and a tremendous sense of enjoyment and personal expression. But after an assault, the person finds themselves apathetic and disinterested in playing guitar. This loss of interest in activities can extend beyond just hobbies. People might lose their interest in social activities, in exercise, or even in spending time with loved ones. The sense of joy and motivation that once fueled their interests and joy in activities completely vanishes, leaving the person with little drive or interest to do anything. And this symptom can be incredibly disheartening, as activities that used to provide a sense of accomplishment or meaning, contributing to a person's sense of identity, these things completely disappear, leaving the person feeling empty and directionless. Now, there are several reasons why people experience this loss of interest in activities that they used to enjoy doing in PTSD. As I talked about earlier, the traumatic event can shatter a person's sense of safety and security, resulting in them viewing the world as a dangerous place, and therefore don't want to do any activities outside of the safety of their home because it might seem reckless or needlessly putting themselves at risk. Additionally, the impact of the traumatic event can be incredibly draining, leaving a person emotionally exhausted and having little energy or drive in doing activities that they used to enjoy. And finally, the impact of the trauma can make it difficult to experience positive emotions because the person is so preoccupied with fear or sadness or anger that it makes it difficult to want to do anything. And related to this, one of the most devastating symptoms of PTSD is an inability to experience positive emotions. Following a traumatic event, a person can become emotionally numb, having difficulty experiencing feelings like love, joy, or excitement. This inability to feel positive emotions is more than just feeling sad. It's a sense of emotional flatness where the range of human emotions is muted. The person merely goes through the motions of daily life without any spark or joy that once made life meaningful or enjoyable. Social interactions that used to be fun and filled with laughter now feel forced and empty. It's almost like the person is just going through the motions of their life, feeling robotic and flat. They know they should be feeling a sense of happiness or joy when playing with their children, but they feel nothing. And this can lead to more feelings of guilt and shame as a person feels like they're faking it in their social interactions, not being genuine, and pretending to feel happy or interested in things that they could care less about. And finally, the last of this group of PTSD symptoms is a sense of detachment and estrangement from other people. In PTSD, the person often feels a sense of emotional isolation, making it difficult to trust or connect with other people, including loved ones. They may feel that they can't relate to other people or that other people don't relate to or don't understand them. And as a result, the person with PTSD becomes more withdrawn and distant as they struggle to share their experiences with friends, fearing that they're going to be judged or misunderstood. And this social detachment or estrangement can happen for a number of reasons. First of all, the traumatic event can shatter a person's sense of safety and security. As I mentioned earlier, they may have difficulty trusting other people, and opening up to others can feel risky or dangerous. So the person doesn't want to get close to other people for the risk of being hurt again. The person with PTSD may view themselves as fundamentally different or damaged, broken after the traumatic event, making them feel like they're unworthy of connection or love from other people. And the more disconnected and estranged a person feels, the more they withdraw from others, which just fuels a greater sense of disconnection and detachment. Hyperarousal symptoms can vary in intensity and frequency from person to person, and for some people with PTSD, they may experience all of the hyperarousal symptoms, whereas for other people, they might just experience a few of the hyperarousal symptoms that become particularly troublesome or interfering. What happens for people with PTSD is that they experience hyperarousal because their body's natural fight or flight response gets stuck in the on position. Parts of the brain that are responsible for processing fear become extremely hypersensitive, almost like an overly sensitive smoke detector. So the smoke detector is constantly going off, even with just a little bit of burnt toast. It's the same for a person with PTSD. They're in a constant state of physiological arousal, with their body releasing stress hormones like adrenaline that just keep the person on edge all the time, even when there's no real threat. So what are some of these types of hyperarousal symptoms in PTSD? The first is heightened levels of irritability and anger outbursts. Now, to explain this, I want you to imagine that you're like a pot of boiling water on the stove. And typically the water simmers gently, and this represents a calm and regulated nervous system in its natural state. Now imagine a stressful event like being stuck in traffic. The pot might bubble a little bit more vigorously, but once the stressor passes, once you get out of the traffic jam, the water simmers down back to its normal state. The thing is, for someone with PTSD, it's like the pot is already simmering on high heat. Any minor inconvenience or stressor, like being stuck in traffic or being late for a meeting, is the equivalent of cranking the heat even higher. This constant state of simmering tension makes a person much more susceptible to frustration and anger. Essentially, PTSD shortens the person's fuse, so any little thing can cause them to explode in anger. And the problem with these angry outbursts is that they often get directed towards the people who are closest to the person. Spouses, children, close friends, because these are the people that we interact with most frequently, and the people who may inadvertently push our buttons when we're in this heightened state. And these angry outbursts can damage relationships and create a vicious cycle of increasing conflict and further anger outbursts, making it even more difficult to manage anger effectively. A second manifestation of hyperarousal symptoms in PTSD includes the tendency towards reckless or self-destructive behavior. This can include things like self-harming behavior, abusing drugs or alcohol, dangerous driving, risky thrill-seeking behavior like extreme sports, unprotected sex with multiple partners, gambling, picking fights with strangers, all sorts of things. And this can seem a bit counterintuitive. Why would someone who's already feeling unsafe seek out further danger? Now, the first reason people do this is that it provides some temporary relief from the hyperarousal itself. The person's in a constant state of on in their fight or flight response, which can be incredibly uncomfortable and anxiety-provoking. So some people with PTSD engage in risky behaviors as a way of trying to escape this turmoil. The self-harming or risk-taking can provide a temporary, albeit unhealthy, sense of relief by providing a different kind of intense sensation. The reckless and self-destructive behavior can also provide the person a sense of control, or at least the mirage of control. PTSD can leave a person feeling hopeless and feeling out of control in their life. So by engaging in these risky behaviors, it's almost like the person is trying to regain a sense of control in some area of their life. It can also provide a sense of control over emotions. As I mentioned in a previous video, people with PTSD can experience emotional numbing as a way of detaching from the overwhelming emotions associated with the trauma. And this emotional numbing leads to a sense of disconnection from themselves and the world around them. And so by engaging in risky behaviors or self-harming behaviors like cutting or burning, it's the person's attempt to try and feel something. The big problem about engaging in these risky and self-harming behaviors is that they don't provide any lasting relief. Rather, the behaviors create a vicious cycle where the person turns to these risky and self-harming behaviors to escape the discomfort of the hyperarousal, only to end up feeling worse and furthering the need to escape from this state. Another example of hyperarousal symptoms in PTSD is hypervigilance, which is a state of alertness and excessive focus on potential threats in a person's environment. People with PTSD become hypervigilant to their surroundings, constantly scanning for anything that might be a sign of danger or threat, constantly looking for the exits in a room, avoiding certain situations such as crowds because it's difficult to keep track of everyone who's around, or They may sit with their back to the wall so they can be aware of everything and everyone in the room. And as you can imagine, hypervigilance can be incredibly draining and exhausting. Constantly scanning the environment for threats is mentally exhausting, making it difficult to concentrate or focus or get anything done. The constant focus on potential danger or threat causes a person to be constantly on edge, fueling anxiety and making it difficult to relax. And constantly scanning for danger can cause a person to avoid social situations or public places because it's just a lot easier to stay home so they're not always having to scan everything around them. The next example of hyperarousal symptoms in PTSD is an exaggerated startle response. For people with PTSD, their startle response is exaggerated and easily triggered, making them feel constantly jumpy and on edge. Now, the startle response in people is a basic brainstem response. When a sudden, loud, or unexpected event occurs, the brainstem sends a signal to our muscle, causing a brief involuntary contraction, which prepares our body to take action to fight or run away, depending on the perceived threat. But in PTSD, the fear processing part of the brain, something called the amygdala, becomes hypersensitive due to the traumatic experience. And what this means is that even little things that wouldn't normally trigger a startle response, like a knock on the door or the phone ringing, gets misinterpreted as a threat by the amygdala. And this leads to the exaggerated startle response, which can include a person basically jumping and reacting, increased heart rate, muscle tension, sweating, a surge of fear or anxiety, leaving the person feeling jittery and on edge after the startle response. And it can take some time for a person with PTSD to calm down, leaving them feeling shaky and tense for an extended period of time. Now, one of the more interfering hyperarousal symptoms of PTSD involves difficulties with concentrating. And to understand why this happens, imagine your brain kind of like the CPU of a computer. When you're in a relaxed state, the CPU works perfectly fine, allocating resources to whatever task is at hand, whatever you're working on. But in the hyperarousal caused by PTSD, your brain is constantly being bombarded with signals from the amygdala, which perceives threat everywhere. Remember, it's the fear center. So this is kind of like overloading the CPU with a lot of unnecessary tasks, making it difficult to focus whatever you're trying to focus on. And there are a number of ways in which hyperarousal and PTSD affects concentration. The intrusive thoughts about the traumatic events or worries about the future can hijack a person's attention, making it difficult to stay present and focused on what they're trying to do. A person with PTSD is often distracted by sensory overload. Hypervigilance to their environment makes a person hypersensitive to what's going on around them, who's around them. Various sounds and even minor background noises become distracting and disrupt focus because the person is so hyper-aware to all of this stuff. And PTSD can interfere with executive functioning, which are those higher-level brain processes that are responsible for things like planning, organizing, and controlling your thoughts and actions. Hyperarousal can negatively impact executive functioning, which makes it difficult to sustain focus and be organized to complete tasks. And as a result, this can have a ripple effect on various aspects of life, including impaired work performance, as a person may miss deadlines, they're less productive at work, or they may make errors in judgment. Students with PTSD may struggle to concentrate in lectures or complete tasks on time, or perform well on exams. It can also lead to problems in relationships, as a person with PTSD may have difficulty following conversations, or might appear distant to other people because their mind is so preoccupied with other things, and this can lead to problems in relationships with family and friends. And the final hyperarousal symptom in PTSD involves difficulty sleeping. Hyperarousal interferes with sleep in a number of ways, including difficulty falling asleep. When your body's constantly in high alert, it becomes very difficult to switch off and relax to go to sleep. Intrusive thoughts related to the traumatic event or worries about the future can cause a person's mind to stay on and keep racing and make it difficult to fall asleep. And even if the person's able to fall asleep, hyperarousal can result in difficulty staying asleep throughout the night. A person's sleep can be interrupted by nightmares about the traumatic event, or even minor noises in the environment can trigger a startled response, which wakes a person up from their sleep. So for people with PTSD, their sleep tends to be very shallow and non-restorative. And so even if the person's able to sleep for several hours, the quality of the sleep is often very poor and results in the person feeling unrefreshed from their sleep, and they still feel tired, irritable, or foggy when they wake up. And as you might expect, like most things with PTSD, this can lead to a vicious cycle in which sleep deprivation fuels anxiety and hyperarousal symptoms. As the more tired and exhausted a person is, the more difficulty their brain has in terms of regulating emotions and managing stress, which just contributes to increased anxiety, tension, and difficulty relaxing. So these various hyperarousal symptoms in PTSD can lead to lots of problems and difficulties in a person's functioning and in their interpersonal relationships. So those are the 4 symptom clusters of PTSD and the various types of symptoms that can potentially make up PTSD. Now, it's important to understand that a person doesn't need to have all of the symptoms for a diagnosis of PTSD. Rather, for a diagnosis of PTSD, the person needs to have at least one re-experiencing symptom, at least one avoidance symptom, at least 2 negative alterations in thoughts and mood symptoms, and at least 2 hyperarousal symptoms. And I won't get into the math behind it, but what this means is that there are literally thousands and thousands of different combinations of symptoms and variants that can lead to a diagnosis of PTSD. So PTSD can look very different in different people, and there is no one single presentation of PTSD. So I hope that gives you a better understanding about the nature and scope of PTSD symptoms. And if you want to learn more about effective treatment of PTSD, I'd encourage you to check out this video. So that's all for today's video. As always, thank you for making it all the way to the end of this extra long video, and I will see you in the next one.